Discuss this issue further, we're now joined by the COO of the organisation Undoing Tax Abuse, OUTA, Ben Turon. Ben, thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure having you. So in many ways, you set the steam rolling with this particular case. Take us back to when you alerted the banking authorities.
A few months ago, good evening and thank you for the opportunity. A few months ago, we wrote to the Registrar of Banks when we found that the Guptas bonded a number of properties, and the value of the properties was somewhere around 240 million. The bonds were valued 2 million short of $1 billion. So that's R1 billion, 5 times the value of the property, 4 times of the value. Bear in mind, to service a bond of $1 billion, you need 100 million rand every month. So we wrote to the bank, the Registrar of Banks, and a few days, less than a week later, the Bank of Baroda then wrote to the Guptas and said, we don't need your service anymore, you are unwelcome as a customer. The Gupta family, the Gupta businesses, wrote to the Bank of Baroda, well, they went to court to get an interdict. And that was heard last week, and today the results came out where the court said the Bank of Baroda have the right to close the accounts.
All right, so
now they have 7 days to cash out.
So this all started with the Bank of Baroda actually enabling the Gupta businesses far short of the normal lending requirements, where you have to have assets to a value that is commensurate with what you're being lent.
Yeah.
And that would have landed them in trouble, so they basically run for cover. And so the Guptas now have got the situation, and maybe it's a question to ask up front. In going after them in this way, you have to weigh up job losses. They're saying up to 7,000, we're not sure what the number is, or fighting corruption. What do you do?
There's no question, none whatsoever. There is a moral dilemma at the beginning that you say, okay, there are job losses. But when it comes to corruption, you cannot afford to allow companies to continue purely for the sake of jobs. Corruption, once it sits into a country and once it's in a company, there's no turning back. And right now, this country is rotten with corruption, from the top right down. We found out, and if you ask anybody in South Africa today, give corruption a name, the name would be Guptas. And we decided we are on a crusade. We will eliminate that corruption, we will find the root of it, and we will eradicate it.
But this isn't the end of the story for you. You are trying to ring fence almost 2 billion rands worth of monies that are banked in trust at the moment.
Absolutely. Now, it's a very complicated story outside, but let me just simplify it. When you have a mine, a percentage somewhere around 4 to 5% must be ring-fenced of the revenue to generate, and it gets ring-fenced into a fund, and that fund gets used to rehabilitate the mine for human habitation afterwards. Because all the banks in South Africa said no to the Guptas, now they use the Bank of Baroda, and that money has then been transferred into the Bank of Baroda. They've in the interim, they've actually sold AN7. They said they sold AN7. They said they sold the TNA, as well as the 2 mines. Now, here's the danger. In the process of selling the mine, this money, the closing, there's a sale going on here, there's cash lying here. In this process of transferring and the bank accounts being closed, the danger exists that 2 billion rand, somewhere between 1.7 a year ago and 2 billion today that we estimate, can disappear into the ether. We cannot afford that. That 2 billion rand is meant for South Africa. The mine, the ring fence there, it was meant to ensure that the mine is rehabilitated so that people can live in the area.
What would ordinarily happen to that 2 billion in an arm's length transaction? They sell the mine to a third party. What would happen to those funds?
The fund has trustees,
right?
And the trustees is supposedly independent of the company, and their job is to ensure, under the auspices of the Department of Mining, to ensure that that fund remains, it grows, but it remains safe in there. This is not the case here. When we wrote to the Bank of Baroda, and we actually asked the CEO of OUTA, we asked the trustees, we copied them all. We did not get a response from the trustees. We got a response from the CEO, which definitely says that this fund is not independent. When she wrote back and said, we will not entertain anything. She's got no right to do that, because she's supposed to be independent from where the fund is.
So the danger is, if things get shut down quickly, it will be very difficult to recover this 2 billion if it disappears.
I have no idea what the plans are to transfer the money out of Bank of Baroda, but 2 billion rand fills a lot of suitcases. And what we are asking for is that the court instructs the Bank of Baroda to maintain the trust fund as it is there until we have proper independent trustees that can take care of the fund independent of everybody else. We're hoping that the Department of Mining would actually contribute to that to make sure that that fund is secure.
So the Minister of Mines really is the custodian of mining in South Africa, and in theory should step up and make a statement or take action.
We are very worried about the minister, the Department of Mining as well as the Minister, because a year ago when Oak Bay applied to have a certain amount of money available so they can use it, within 24 hours it was approved. No research, no investigation about that. So we are very worried about the role the department and the minister is playing in this process. Where they are supposed to be the custodians, they have suddenly become complicit to the process.
It's been a long battle. You've been at this for a while on many fronts. Do you think that a corner has been turned with this shutting down of bank accounts?
For the Guptas, yes. But I think it's much bigger than that, South Africa. I think that we are starting to see the beginning, the signs of the beginning of the house of cards falling apart. If you just look at the headlines over the last 2 to 3 weeks, there's a corner that's been turned, and we believe that South Africa has had enough of corruption. South Africa is actually standing up to say enough is enough, and we need to root corruption out.
What can citizens do? Because, you know, most citizens will go on Twitter, read newspapers and hear about all of these things, not knowing that they could participate in cleaning things up.
Number one, they need to hold the representatives to account. MPs are representatives of South Africans like you and me, and it's time that we speak directly to them. That's the first thing. OUTA is available for them to communicate with us when they see something wrong, and we will take action. But for me, the ultimate call would be that South Africans should support organizations, civil society organizations like OUTA, so that we can fight the fight on their behalf. Because people feel powerless sitting in their homes. They are not powerless. In fact, the Constitution says the power sits within the citizen.
Okay, Ben Turon, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights with us, and let's hope that corruption, wherever it exists and whoever is doing it, is getting a warning from the actions, the things that are happening now. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, and thank